So let's get started with the lecture today. Before we start, I want to talk about the take-home test, and I have a couple of other announcements that I want to talk about first. The take-home test, it's over. I don't know about you guys, but I'm really relieved when these things are over, just because it means things worked out, and they seem to have worked out relatively painlessly. I was a little nervous about it because it was the first time on Brightspace. You know, it's always like a big change when you move to another system in a way. But it seems to have worked out. Like most of you kind of completed the quiz, and what you might have noticed is there was something different from how I had announced it originally. You should have seen all questions at the same time instead of one question after the other. It just turned out to be not foolproof enough. Right? So when you create these kind of things, you need to make them 100%, 110% foolproof, and then you have to weigh the pedagogical values against the practical headache that it's going to cause. So I decided to switch that, but everybody should have seen it, all questions on one page. My original intention for that is I just didn't want you guys to, I don't know, print out the whole thing. I want you guys to do this individually, you know. Wow. I don't know, if you really want to cheat on this, there's a way you can do it. Of course, you can cheat in everything. You can go to an exam, you can cheat. But it's not the idea, you know. And if this is the way you approach things, you should really consider what you're doing. Just for your own sake, you know. But the idea of this whole take-home test really was to get an incentive to get you encouraged and engaged with the readings. That was the whole point of it. And you saw the questions were really silly, like what is the Gini coefficient? I don't know, what is this word here, what is this word there, and so on. So in the final exam, you won't see any questions like that. Yeah? This is a different learning outcome. Here the learning outcome was get you engaged with the readings, through the readings. For the final exam, questions will be much more at the level of understanding, yeah? Much more at the level of transferring knowledge. So there, I'm going to ask, does something go up or down? That's not what you want to know, right? You don't need to know exact percentages in a way, but you need to know, is it like a big difference, is it a small difference? Now, what is the effect that goes into something like that? So I'm not going to regard like, I don't know, is it 73 or 71%? You know, that's not the point. The point is it's much higher than 23, for example, like in another context, like in the other treatment condition, for example. So that's the main thing. And also, it's about transferring the knowledge, applying the knowledge, which is then a different learning outcome that I try to achieve. So here, keep in mind, with this assessment, really was getting you engaged with the readings, and I hope that it succeeds. Generally, I just select these readings different ways, because first of all, I think they're all interesting. I think there are none. I try to not select anything that is boring or that is, I don't know, that I don't like. And secondly, I selected them also on the basis of how comprehensible they are, or what I think they are. So there are a bunch of other texts that I would like to select and give you, but I know this is over your heads and you will be completely overwhelmed with it. So I kind of select, which is often you see, I don't know, these. I just noticed I have a lot of experimental papers in the reading list. I didn't really know that until now. Now I'm realizing this, but apparently I like these papers a lot. Anyway, so the test is over. This is the grade distribution. As I said, most of you guys made it past the 50%, which was required to pass. Actually, there was the way these grades then, or these percentages, you know, there were 20 questions, 10 points. They translated. Usually, it's always genius with its grading. You know, I always kind of bang my head against the wall, but it's just the system. It's just what the cards we are dealt with. So the points get translated into percentages, and then percentages get translated into letter grades. And those letter grades is not something that I came up with, but it's a 50% grading schema that UCD gave itself, which is very generous when you look at these multiple choice questions, right? Because essentially, with 90% basically having 9 out of 10 points, basically having 18 out of 20 questions, you still got an A+ for this thing. And an open book exam like this, where in theory everybody can do well, I'm not surprised that the grade distribution is very much skewed to the better. So I think almost half of you guys got a B+ or an A- or better. So which is great, because it means you got engaged with the readings. But nevertheless, let me mention, we had actually just one person who kind of got all questions correct. It was Connor. I don't know if Connor is here. It's not here. So congrats. But I also listed the other people who got A+. I hope you don't mind. You know, it's the best grade. But you see, you could still get an A+ if you had 9 out of 10 points, which corresponds to 18 correct questions. Okay, when you go into your Brightspace right now, you can actually see where you went wrong. I think that's kind of interesting, but again, you know, as I mentioned, don't overly stress that because in the final exam, I'm not going to ask you, well, something like this I might ask, yeah? But in the overall exam, I'm not going to ask you what is the bloody Gini coefficient. So I don't know if you kind of had it wrong by 1 decimal, it doesn't really matter in that regard. It's a question of the understanding that is important there. So, but anyway, when you want to know where did you lose your points, or you know, are you engaged with it, you can do that in Brightspace. You should be able to see that. It's always difficult for me to see what you see. You know, that's sort of the tricky thing. But I hope that you can find that out. And here's one question that actually most people got wrong. This is sort of where almost everybody lost points except Connor. I think, which is sort of like an odd question. You know, in the study by Mushnik, remember, there was like the social influence bias. Artificially downvoting a comment, they had like Reddit, something like Reddit, there were comments and people could up or downvote it. And here the correct answer is a little counterintuitive. The correct answer were both more people, was both an increased probability to upvote the comment and an increased probability to downvote the comment. How the hell can that be? That's kind of like really odd. But think about it in this way. There's a third category of people not voting anything, neither up or down. That's the thing. So think about, I don't know, out of 100 people, 10 people upvote the comment, 10 people downvote the comment. That's like the treatment the control condition. Then I go into the treatment condition where I artificially upvote or downvote the comment. In this case, it was artificially downvote a comment. And now out of 100 people, 20 people upvote the comment, 20 people downvote the comment, and 60 people don't do anything. While in the first case, 80 people didn't do anything. So that's sort of like one of those weird things. You know, I know there was a bit of a trick question, but you know, I don't know, at the end it's still got an A+ for it. But that's sort of why, if you might wonder. Actually, you know, I have here the graph. This is the graph, the relevant graph that we had in the lecture. You see here, first of all, on the left-hand side, the probability to upvote. And that's sort of what most of you guys got. I don't know, if I artificially downtreat something, it goes up. Yeah? But it's always compared to the control. Or to how it was before. While if I kind of artificially downtreat it, then the probability downward also goes up. You see? It's above that line of the control. That's sort of how this comes about. But keep in mind, it's like this thing that there's a large chunk of people that don't do anything, and that chunk of people becomes smaller. I thought it was interesting to talk about anyway, because it shows you also how sometimes you really need to think about, okay, what's actually going on here? And what are the people, I don't know, how does something come about? Okay, so that was the only question I just briefly wanted to mention about. As I said, you can go in. Let me see if I can figure this out. So when you go into Brightspace, yeah, you should be able to then kind of see all your questions and see where you did something correct. At first, kind of that got me confused, but actually it was correct when you kind of didn't tick it, right? So that's the thing. In contrast, when you made a mistake, you see the X here. So this is sort of where a mistake was made. Okay. What about the take-home test? Any other questions about this? The grades aren't up. You see, that's one of the things that I did it yesterday. You're going to see it. So I automatically graded them. They are in my Brightspace, so maybe I need to do another step to transfer them and so on. I'm going to look into it. I'm going to find out. So. It's up? It's not up?
No, mine's not, but his is accepted. Yeah.
Okay, I look into it. Yeah, that's exactly the kind of thing where the workflow is new to me too, and where I'm always freaking out pressing a button. Yeah, because if you press a button and it goes to, well, this is, it's so fine, but I had like, when I had the first year module with 500 students, and you press a button to do the wrong thing, God, your inbox blows up. You don't want to do that. So you don't want to be in that situation. So I look into that, I ask around what's going on. Maybe I need to do another step. I thought it automatically graded all of them. I deliberately waited until the deadline is over. It's another thing I didn't want to see that you guys see the grade before other people still take it. But it should be up there, so we'll figure it out. The grades are there, they're not lost, which is my biggest fear, because that would be a major screw up. But no, we got the grades, so we're going to release them. Okay. Now a couple of announcements, or anything else about the take-home test? There will be another one like that, pretty much the same style, pretty much the same, like also 20 questions on the readings that you guys have to do until then. It's at the very end of the semester, the trimester. I don't know if it's in the last week or the week before, but pretty much the same spiel. And now we all know how to do it, and by that time I'll probably figure out how to release the grades directly. Okay, so a couple of announcements. The first announcement is on Thursday. This Thursday there's going to be no lecture. So Thursday, no lecture. So our next lecture after today is going to be on Tuesday. And on Tuesday, we're actually going to have a guest lecture. So I will be there as well, but my colleague Egli is going to give a guest lecture. You might know Egli if you've been in, well, she taught the Sociological Analysis Research Design module for us last year. Egli is going to talk about her research, and I invited her for a couple of reasons. First of all, I think it's always nice to see another face, so maybe you're getting tired of me. I don't know. But also, I'm going to give a guest lecture in her module, so I thought, let's reciprocate that. And she's going to talk about something that I had thought we would be there already. She's going to talk about her own research, which is related to discrimination and norms, and that's like an area that I wanted to get started with you guys now as well. Okay, so on Tuesday, Egli is going to be there, and actually I'm going to be there as well. So I'm looking forward to see what she's going to talk about in her research. Okay, a last announcement before we get started with the lecture is I have a question I wanted to follow up on you guys. Did anybody do the elevator experiment? Where you walk into an elevator and you look into the wrong direction and you check out what's going on? Has anybody done that yet? I would be really intrigued to hear what comes out of it. So if you have a couple of, I don't know, 3-4 people, try it, just give it a go, just see what people's reactions are. We talked about this in the first lecture on social influence, or was it the second one? I think it was the first one on social influence, where you walk into the elevator and you just look into the other direction and then see what do people do when they kind of walk in. It's more of a social psychology experiment, but nevertheless, it's still very interesting for us in the context of social influence. Okay, so if you do it, please report back to me. I'm going to keep asking about that because I really want to know. Okay, so let's get started with the lecture today. Today we're going to talk about broken windows. Broken window is a broken window theory. Broken window theory is actually quite an important theory in criminology. And I selected it because it kind of takes the idea of social influence and applies it now to something, I don't know, that is not success. Yeah? We talked about how social influence works. First of all, these dynamics matter for macro level outcomes, and then we looked at how social influence works in different contexts, and then we talked about how people can get more success because they already have success. Yeah? And now we're going to talk about the opposite, how something can deteriorate even more because it already deteriorated. The same logic. It's the same logic, but now it flips it around. But how seeing others not following the norm makes you then behave in a similar way, not caring about a place. And so broken window has been important in the area of crime or order or social disorder. And I also then later on want to talk about broken window theory in social context and also at UCD. Well, actually, I've conducted some studies last year with students, with master students, where we done something very interesting to check the broken window theory at UCD. But that's something we're probably going to talk about in our next regular lecture. Okay, so today let's get started with crime. It's an area that is fascinating. I actually published quite a bit on crime, or the sociology of crime, because networks really seem to matter there as well. And networks is sort of my main area. So how people are connected with each other, how people co-offend. That's something that I study. Or actually, how violence happens. I recently had a paper on domestic violence, and we looked at response networks around. Meaning like how people react to violent incidents. But crime is one of those things, you know, first of all, we see often clustering, like more crime in certain areas than in others, you know, like something seems to be going on. Is there something about the social context effect or about the environment or about the people that live there, you know, what's going on? And or is it sort of something else? And that something else is something we're going to look at, is how one incident, and that's something that I'm fascinated by, which is how an incident of criminal behavior or disorder or disobedience can lead to more incidences of crime or disorder or disobedience. So now we're talking about social influence and how social influence can actually have a negative impact in society. And broken window theory has been actually popularized and used. Really, is one of those theories that really made its way into policies and into the way the police worked. It really changed the way police officers went after their business. The biggest example was in New York. In New York, we had, nowadays, luckily they stopped it because they kind of sort of misused this theory in certain ways as well. We had like the stop and frisk strategy in the US, in New York in particular, where police officers were really harsh on cracking down crime. They really stopped people just for the, I don't know, they just looked a little suspicious and they really wanted to know what's going on in here. You know, so it was perceived as quite an invasion into people's personal life without criminal incidents happening in a way. And so it was like this zero policing strategy, which some people still think about. And, you know, in some ways, it actually, when you look at the crime numbers, it's another fascinating thing. It's a macro phenomenon right now, you know, and we're often talking about what individuals do lead to macro level outcomes, and the main point of analytical sociology is to do exactly that. Think about macro level outcomes. Of course, we care about the individuals, what they do, but we care about them in order to understand what are the macro level outcomes. And one of those macro level outcomes is that the crime rate really declined in the 1990s in the US. But also elsewhere, it's like a general phenomenon. It's really odd. It's like one of those things that really caught social scientists off guard, where you know, crime rates really went down. When you look at the numbers here, they went down quite a bit. You know, the crimes per residence in New York, they went down to half or even a third of what they were, like just within a 10, 15-year period, you know. So the question is, what the hell was going on? And up to date, we still don't really know. But one very intriguing explanation for that is actually that it has to do with social influence. And that's a paper that I'm currently working on where we try to understand the macro level phenomena, something called the age crime curve, but how that comes about when people get influenced in a certain way. Okay, so it kind of led to zero tolerance policing, which is criticized. Yeah, nowadays they stopped stop and frisk in New York. They don't do that anymore, but it caused quite some uproar at the time. So what is this based on? Well, it's based on broken window theory. And broken window theory it comes down to a very simple idea that when you walk by and you see a window that is already broken in, you kind of get the notion, okay, nobody seems to care. Well, more generally, this kind of gives you an idea about how space and people interact in such a way that you kind of get because a lot of things are undefined in a way in our social life, you know, about how we are supposed to behave, what are norms, you know, what is acceptable behavior, what is not acceptable behavior. And when you walk by and you see a place like this, you might wonder, okay, who the fuck cares? And then you go and you say, okay, I can just throw in something else. Why should I really clean things up here in a way? There might be a rational effect because you think, okay, well, it doesn't really change the situation. Windows need to be replaced already anyway, right? So it might actually, and that's sort of like the kind of thing where you then drill down a little deeper. But how does the mechanism actually work? You know what's going on? Is it like your perception of the norm? Is it sort of the intended goals that change? Is it the assumed costs that change? All sorts of things, you know, but the idea really is like you leave something abandoned in a way, it might lead to even more abandonment. And the whole thing started in the 1970s with a guy called Philip Zimbardo. He was a psychologist who did like the first major experiment in that regard. So he did, and today we're going to talk about a couple of studies that have very interesting research designs. I'm always looking for interesting research designs. So he did something where he parked a car in the Bronx in New York, and that was in the 1970s. So in those days, the Bronx was pretty run down. It was a very violent area to be in, and so he parked the car in the Bronx, and he left the door open, and the license plate, he kind of unscrewed it so that it was hanging down. Yeah? So it gave the impression of an abandoned car. Within hours, I don't know, the first people came by and kind of stole the battery of the car. Within another hours, people kind of stole all sorts of other things, the side mirrors, and seriously within 4 or 5 hours, the car was completely vandalized, windows were broken in, and kids used it as a playground. So it deteriorated very, very quickly. So then he did the same thing. He put a car, exactly the same condition, like door open, license plate, kind of hanging it down. He put that at an abandoned spot in Palo Alto. Palo Alto is where Stanford is. It's an affluent neighborhood. It's actually quite expensive to live there. Beautiful to be there. So he parked the car there, and what happened? Nothing happened. For over a week, nothing happened. The car was just there. There was no people stealing anything. There were no people smashing in other windows. There was no people kind of taking the car apart. Okay. But now the next thing comes into play. And this is sort of now where it becomes really interesting in terms of design. So now what he did, and again, you have to give the guy credit for it, he took a sledgehammer and he kind of smashed the window in himself of that car. And after that, well, actually, Palo Alto was a very affluent neighborhood, very white-collar area. So after he smashed in the window of that car, the same happened as had happened in the Bronx. Within a couple of hours, the car disintegrated. People went and vandalized it even more. So what do we learn from that? Well, it's sort of not just different neighborhoods that matter here, because that would be a very simple explanation. And you always need to be careful, okay, don't be too simple. Always think a little deeper, right? So, and if you kind of wouldn't really think about that, you would say, okay, well, it's about the neighborhoods. Bronx is much poorer than Palo Alto. Poorer people tend to vandalize. That's sort of like a very simple, simplistic explanation that doesn't cut it. That doesn't go far enough, right? But now kind of showing kind of that after kind of the first basically stone was thrown, the first window was broken in Palo Alto, that the same thing unraveled in Palo Alto as had happened in the Bronx. That kind of tells you that it's not just about the people. It's not just about the neighborhoods, but there's something else going on. And there are these, and that's sort of got the whole thing started, and then it was made popular by two guys, by George Kelling and James Wilson. They wrote an article in The Atlantic. It's a magazine. It's actually quite interesting to read. I read it yesterday, the original article, 82, where they kind of really cared or really wondered about how does policing work? Kind of how are police officers effective in doing their job? What are their strategies? And there are some widely different ideas about how you should police, In some countries, I never ever saw a policeman in my life in the village I grew up in. I never see them. Only you see them maybe at a charity event or something like that. While in other areas, in other countries, I remember when I was in the US for a while, I saw them all the time just walking around. So there are very different strategies to make a presence known. And now you wonder, okay, what happens when a police officer walks around? Does that really prevent an incidence of crime? If you're a criminal, you just, you know where the guy's walking around. You're going to go somewhere else. You're going to go into the dark alley or whatnot. But the idea is that it does something else, that it projects sort of a level of control or a norm that people care, right? And not like, okay, we don't really care about a neighborhood. The police doesn't even go there anymore, which is how it was before. So anyway, so the idea really is that that if a window in a building is broken and is left unrepaired, that all the rest of the windows will soon be broken as well. And that this also is the case, and that sort of makes it interesting in nice neighborhoods as well as in rundown neighborhoods. So it's not just about the people, it's actually a social dynamic that kind of seems to unfold here. That when something is broken already, that then people are more likely to break other things. And as I mentioned before, there are a couple of mechanisms that could at play here. It could be that you get the impression that nobody seems to care, which then essentially means, okay, I don't know, if I walk by an area and windows are broken, it seems like nobody is punishing people for doing that. Yeah? So maybe I kind of get that piece of information and think, oh, I always wanted to throw in windows. Yeah? I don't know. But that's sort of something that you need to question then. Is that really the case? But that mechanism will only work then. So if there's a general tendency, people would want to throw in windows, but they don't do it because they get the feeling that they're going to get punished for it. Right? Somebody is going to crack down on them, somebody is going to tell them not to do it, or I don't know, they're going to get penalized for it. And then they see windows being broken, and that kind of might send the signal that there's no penalty going on here, that there's no punishment going on. And then people actually might do it. But you see, this kind of mechanism only works if you assume that people actually really want to throw in windows. Because why would I want to throw in a window? Yeah? That's sort of a whole other question. So there could be other things going on as well. So it's about the cost of punishment, or actually maybe the enjoyment is a different one. Maybe it's sort of like just more enjoyable when I throw in the last window, try to hit it. I make a sport out of it, compared to when they're all windows and they're all fine. So maybe I get more out of it when others have already done it before. So that's sort of the kind of thing that you need to dig in a little deeper about how something comes about. But the general idea really is that signs of disorder, like broken windows, litter, and graffiti, so they sort of extended it, not just to windows, it's sort of a more general idea, but also littering and graffiti and other types of publicly displayed disorder and petty crime, that these kind of things lead to even more of the same kind of criminal or disobedient behavior. In a nutshell, that this leads to this. And hey, you might have experienced that, yeah, question?
On the point on public disorder, is it similar to the case with revolutions, that once someone starts this act, my understanding,
Yeah. Well, that's something we have a whole lecture on that. It's threshold effects, what you refer to right now. It's like, I don't know, if somebody stands up and because somebody else stands up, I now stand up and now somebody else stands up and so on. And when you see these standing ovation is a good example, but obviously you refer to revolutions, social movements, and there it's a big thing, because there which is sort of really interesting, that sometimes a big social movement happens for no big reason, yeah? And that's always like really odd for us, because we always kind of think when a lot of people are on the street, there must have been a big reason for it in a way. But these kind of dynamics, it's a bit like earthquakes. Like the same small thing can cause a huge earthquake, or it can cause a small earthquake. There's another phenomena like that, where one thing can lead to the other, and some people stand up because others already stand up, and that kind of makes other people stand up. And like a week ago, I was at a concert in the Ulan Gallery, which is actually quite nice. And it was a music concert, and the people in front of me stand up for standing ovations. So what am I going to do? I'm going to sit there, even if I would not have wanted to stand up to begin with, right? And I'm not going to stare at this guy's back. So I kind of standing up as well, right? And because I do that, the person behind me then the situation changes. So that's one of those examples where the situation changes because other people do something. And with littering, that's sort of something that might happen here too. Like you throw something onto the floor and then you think, okay, you might actually seriously think, okay, somebody will have to come by to pick up that piece of rubbish anyway, right? So what difference does it make if there's one or two pieces of rubbish there? You can think, okay, and that kind of logic then leads to deterioration of what we see and how much litter we produce. But I have a little video that kind of summarizes it probably better than I could.
3 days before Christmas, 1984, Bernie Getz boarded the number 2 train in Manhattan and sat down next to 4 young African Americans. When the teenagers tried to hustle him for money, something inside Getz snapped. He pulled out a Smith & Wesson .38 and opened fire, shooting down all 4 men. Bernie Getz personified the community of fear that was New York in the 1980s. Politicians had tried reform after reform to stem the flow of crime through the streets of New York. But nothing was working. Street conditions indicated that anything was possible for criminals. Surrounded by unpunished crime, Getz felt justified taking on the vigilante mantle. In the process, he became a criminal himself. But everything changed in New York when 2 revolutionary thinkers arrived on the scene, David Grund and William Bratton. In the late 80s and early 90s, they adopted a new approach to crime, cracking down on misdemeanors like vandalism and fare beating in the subway system. They scrubbed trains for graffiti, repainted them, and maintained a zero-tolerance policy for other small crimes. If you peed in the street, said Braden, you were going to jail. Why adopt harsh measures towards small crimes when serious criminal activity was the deeper issue? Because sometimes the smallest things can act as a tipping point for something massive. By suffocating minor crime, Braden and Gunn were experimenting with the idea by criminologists James Wilson and George Kelly, called broken windows theory. Broken windows theory says the perception of disorder in the community plays a huge role in the spread of crime. One broken window signals to a community that no one cares. So what's to keep people from breaking another? This is the sort of neighborhood where you can get away with crime. When no one cares about little things, bigger things happen. Crime grows and spreads like an infection. Consider yawning. Have you noticed how when one person yawns in a room, everyone feels sleeping? A yawn can act as an idea planted in your brain by someone else's action. Crime can be like a yawn. It's contagious. The smallest trigger can set someone off. Like Bernie Goetz. In New York in the 80s, Goetz was surrounded by crime and disorder. Crossed one too many times on a dirty subway in a neighborhood where no one cared. He pulled the trigger. But it was just around that time that Braden, Gunn, and others began to take broken windows seriously. In 1990, New York had recorded 2,605 homicides. Over the next 5 years, under strict cleanup policies, crime rates plummeted. By 1997, the number of homicides was cut in half. The theory seems to work, but of course, disorder isn't the sole cause of crime, and community cleanup isn't the full solution either. There are 100 factors. Sometimes the issue of crime seems insurmountable, but broken windows theory says that if we just tackle the details, the landscape of crime might tip. We can fix broken windows and take ownership of the dark corners of our neighborhoods. We've always been told to pick up trash to keep our community beautiful, but perhaps if we pick up trash, we can help make our community safe too.
Okay, so that's the reason why I always pick up the trash in my apartment complex when I find some in the common grounds, because it actually can lead to more after it. And actually, there's research that shows that. But you always need to be careful about how things are being used and misused. And this is one of the examples where broken window theory has been misused quite a bit, because it was sort of made responsible. It was like it was the justification for the zero tolerance policing. We sort of had all sorts of negative problems associated with it as well. And as I said earlier, the decline in crime rates over the 90s, which was stunning. It was like one of those really like a big social phenomena that we observed at the macro level that needs explanation. There are all sorts of other explanations for it as well. But the idea really is that social influence works not just on the positive side, but also on the negative side, with respect to social behavior. So it's not just a virus that is being transmitted, but it's a behavior. It's like a misconduct that kind of seems to travel. Now I want to talk a little bit about some experience, some stuff that you guys had to read that I kind of studied that, because again, there's a question, how do we study that? And it's not that trivial. And there's one study conducted by colleagues in the city of Groningen in the Netherlands, really nice place, really great place for social science as well. There's some very good people there who I know quite well. And there's one study that Kaiser and others, and Sigurd Lindberg and Linda Steak did, that got published in Science, which I want to talk a little more about. So they've conducted some experiments on broken window theory or on the spreading of disorder. Like, can we kind of study how disorder spreads? And their idea was the following: thus giving cues that one norm is broken, and they call that the context norm. Does that lead to other norms being broken as well? And they call that the target norm. So you see, I don't know, I come in here, let's say I come in 10 minutes late. Obviously, I'm breaking one norm, context norm. Then another norm kind of gets broken as well, like maybe you talk more. Yeah? You see, while again, you're not supposed to talk while I give the lecture. So that's sort of like the context norm and the target norm, but we can look at that in different contexts. So that's basically the perception that norms don't seem to be followed through on, does that kind of lead to another norm being broken? The first example, which is sort of pretty cool, they looked at graffiti, and more precisely, they looked at littering. So they really looked at people throwing rubbish on the floor. That was like the behavior that they kind of were focusing on. And here the context norm is the target norm is don't litter. You know, that's sort of like the idea is, okay, don't throw something on the floor. And that's sort of like a norm we have in our society, don't do that, you know, in a public space. And then kind of the context norm that they kind of deliberately broke was, and you know, you have to give those guys credit for it, they got research funds to put graffiti at the wall in the city of Groningen. So that was like their research design. So overnight, they kind of went into this alley and painted graffiti there to that wall, while actually there was a sign that said no graffiti. And then they kind of checked on how many people throw a flyer onto the floor. So let me summarize again like how the whole thing works. So they first put flyers on bikes in this alley in the Netherlands. And it was like a crappy flyer from a non-existent company that said, we wish everybody happy holiday. And then, so here you actually see the bikes. This is from the original page. You see how the flyers are attached to the bikes. Okay, so people had to take those flyers off if they wanted to take their bike. And in the Netherlands, bikes is great because people use it a lot. You know, it's like, I don't know, it's like really their number one mode of transport. So there was quite a lot of people actually using these bikes. They were not abandoned there, so people would actually come there. Okay, so first you see those flyers. And now you see like two conditions that they studied. In the one case, order condition, now you see there's a sign that says no graffiti. You know, they deliberately put up that sign there, which says no graffiti. And you see on the wall there's no graffiti. But then, overnight, they actually put next to that graffiti on it, they put some graffiti on it. So now you see how that really clearly breaks that rule. That really, next to the graffiti sign, they deliberately put graffiti. So people were told not to put, I don't know, there shouldn't be any graffiti, but obviously there is. Yeah? So that kind of was what I call the disorder condition, to see kind of, I don't know, to invoke in people that idea that nobody seems to care about these norms. So this is the context norm that they looked at, and then the target norm was don't throw something onto the floor. And again, you kind of see how simple and very straightforward the design here really is. So they attached those flyers to the bike, and then, you know, like one weekend it was the order condition, another weekend it was the disorder condition. And in the order condition, there was a graffiti sign, and there was no graffiti on the wall. While in the disorder condition, the other week, there was a don't have graffiti sign on the wall, and there clearly was graffiti at the wall. So the norm was broken. Call it the order and the disorder condition. And then in both cases, they counted, they were literally sitting up there in an apartment overlooking that little alley, kind of counting how many people threw that flyer onto the floor. So me being the beekeeper, yeah, you know, actually I went to that alley, yeah. So I was in Groningen, and you know, I actually went there, and I don't know, we had like a good night, and what do? We just say, let's go to that alley, you know, and let's take the picture. That's really geeky. This is your activity and what you do. Yeah. So anyway, so there you see there's even more graffiti right now, and I deliberately put something on the floor. So what are the results of this? And at the end, it boils down to some really stunning numbers. When there was no graffiti at the wall, next to the no graffiti sign, only 33% of the people threw down the flyer onto the floor. Of the people that came to collect their bike, 33 threw the flyer onto the floor. Well, a couple of days later, or was it before, I don't know, if they might have switched it around, I don't really know exactly how it was. Almost 70% of the people threw the flyer onto the floor. So it's a huge increase. It's more than double of the people that kind of throw the flyer onto the floor when there seems to be this context norm being broken. Nobody seems to care about enforcing the norms in this little alley. Okay, so that was the difference. So only 33% of the people littered when there was no graffiti, but 69% of the people littered when there was graffiti. So very straightforward, you know, very stunning, very stark contrast. So they repeated that in other contexts. So let me talk about some other ones. So they've also conducted an experiment about bikes. So in this case, there was a parking lot, and the way they did, they kind of put a fence in front of the main entrance to that parking lot, and put a sign on it that you shouldn't walk through here. right? So there's a gate Durchgang, that means not allowed to walk through here, no trespassing, and with an arrow sign that the entrance would be like 200 meters around. So in order to reach that parking lot from the main area, if you're coming, you would have to take a detour of 200 meters to get to that parking lot. Yeah? They blocked it off. But then what they did, they kind of, as you see, this is again like the original picture, they kind of put this fence open just a little bit, so that people could squeeze through. So people could break that norm if they would want to. Yeah? So here now the target norm is don't walk through that, right? There's a clear sign, don't walk through that. But people can break it. And then they study how many people do actually break it, how many people walk through that hole into the fence to get the shortcut. Okay, so this is like the target norm. Now we have the other sign over here, which refers to the context norm. So here it says, jeden fietsen, aanheten, was maken. Basically it means don't lock your bike to this fence. Yeah? So you see, this is like now the context norm that they deliberately put up there and then manipulate it. So now the thing they actually look at, the target norm is no trespassing, don't walk through here. And the way to manipulate, to create an order and a disorder condition where our context norm was obviously broken or wasn't broken, they attach bikes to this fence, or they attach bikes to a bike stand a couple of meters next to that fence. So in the disorder condition, there were 4 bikes locked to the fence, even though there was a sign that this is prohibited. And in the order condition, these 4 bikes were locked to a bike stand just a couple of meters next to the fence. And in both cases, again, we have like an order condition, a disorder condition. One is the control, the other one is the treatment. Then they kind of went and compared how many people do actually walk through that hole in the fence and compared that. And again, results were pretty stunning. Huge differences, even just how small little changes really affect what people do. Right, and how many people follow a norm, how many people don't follow. It's crazy how so skeptical we seem to be to what's going on. So only 20% of the people who wanted to pick up their car violated the no trespassing norm when the bikes were not locked to the fence. The context norm was honored, with the sign, don't have any bikes there. But in contrast, 82% of the people stepped through that gap when the context norm was obviously broken with bikes attached to that fence. So again, very straightforward. We create an order condition, we create a disorder condition, and we see how that affects other people's behavior in terms of breaking a target norm. Okay, in a third experiment, they went to a supermarket, so like a big, it was a shopping center, and they kind of went back to the idea of flyers and attached flyers to cars, in front of cars. So again, people would have to take it off when they went back to use their car. They had to take it and throw it away. And again, the target norm was, don't throw this on the floor. Now, there was rubbish being located elsewhere, but it could be so easy just to throw it on the floor wherever you parked your car. It would be the very straightforward way, but you would break that norm. So here's the parking lot, how the garage, how it looked like. And you see the cars, and the cars had the flyers on their windshield. Now you see something else. You see the shopping carts, and the shopping carts are now used to break the context norm. So what was the context norm in this regard? There was a sign which said, please return your shopping cart. So the norm was, there was like a central location in this parking lot somewhere where you would have to return your shopping cart. And they broke that by deliberately arranging shopping carts all around the parking lot. To signal people didn't follow that target norm, people didn't return their shopping cart. And then, so this is how they created the order condition with no unreturned shopping carts, and the order condition with unreturned shopping carts standing around in the parking lot. And then at the end, they went again to kind of look at how many people throw the flyer onto the floor. Again, you see the setup is very simple. Like you create an order condition, you create a disorder condition, where you violate a context norm, yes or no, and then you look at how do people adhere to a target norm. Do they follow it, yes or no? And again, results were stunning. It was like, again, almost twice as many people littered, threw a flyer onto the floor when the shopping carts were returned, compared to when the shopping carts were standing around and were unreturned. A fourth experiment, actually in the paper they have like 6, but I'm not going to talk about 6, but I'm going to talk about this one because it's also very, very nice design, very clever. So what they do here is they kind of put these envelopes with the note of money shining through, so you could actually see that there's money in that, and they put that into letter boxes in front of apartment houses so that they would stick out, so that people would actually see there's an envelope with money in it, and it's half sticking out of that mailbox. And maybe you see where I'm going with this, because they kind of wanted to know how many people steal that money. And again, it's like a very nice design. You know, kind of, you go create a situation. Of course, it's ethically difficult, but you can deal with that. And in here, they didn't really harm any people. Well, actually, one of the problems that they had in this study was they had to fake that money. Yeah? And if you kind of counterfeit money, you get into all sorts of other troubles. So they had to find out a way to create a counterfeit. Actually, another example. Let me just come back briefly. Just so you get an idea about kind of things you need to think and consider about here. In the case of these shopping carts, they had to come up with a way so that people wouldn't accidentally return those shopping carts in the treatment condition. So what did they do? They put glue onto the shopping carts. Yeah. So that if you would go there and you think, okay, now I'm cleaning up all those 5 shopping carts, some people do that, it's very nice, the people would be stopped from doing that. But these are also the very practical things you need to consider about when you conduct these kind of experiments. And the devil is really in the details when you do these kind of things. But it's nevertheless fascinating to think about this kind of stuff. So they were looking at how many people steal those envelopes. And then they had like different conditions, like the order condition. Again, there was like no graffiti or littering around that mailbox. Then they had like one disorder condition where there was littering around the mailbox, and a second disorder condition, which was even stronger, where there was not just littering, but also graffiti around that mailbox. Then similar design, we had like an order condition and a disorder condition, and then looking at how do people follow the norm of not stealing something. And when we look at those results, again, we find in the order condition only 30% of the people stole, while when there was a disorder, almost twice as many, or more than twice as many people stole that envelope. So when there was graffiti littering around the mailbox, more people stole it. So you see, these are sort of like very straightforward experiments that actually show the full magnitude of how this can actually manifest itself, how this can actually lead to a lot more disorder than we thought. And it's not just a small little increase, it's more than doubling about what's going on here. And there's a whole big research area, economists like to talk about that as well, nudging. It was very interesting, where you make small little changes in a way. Or, in hotels nowadays, you see little signs about, washing the towels and things like that, about how that can actually lead to improve behavior of people. So anyway, I had a little experiment, but we were running out of time, because I was curious about how you could, or what you were thinking about how one could conduct these kind of studies. But maybe that's something you might want to think about, and I come back to that the next lecture when we talk about that, where I'm actually going to talk about what we did at UCD. So we actually try to do these kind of things, and we had some very interesting results. Okay, so as I said, no lecture on Thursday, and on Tuesday we're going to have a guest lecture, so for Tuesday there's no required reading. Okay, see you on Tuesday.